Okay, well, welcome here to the Zebra blog challenge number 4, solution reveal. Now, the first part is a challenge to recreate this view of the interior of a car with rollovers and clickable spots to reveal labels. Now, the first thing I want to do, of course, is load in the graphics. And as I said, before you put everything into the stage, try to get one relationship working. So I'm going to build this just to have the rollover on the steering wheel work so we'd see that label. So you can see I've created the background. So I have the driver view ping placed. I've imported the steering wheel, and I created a text object that says steering wheel. Now, one little hint about this is if you're making callouts, instead of having to have a separate rectangle behind your text if you want to give it a background, an easy way to do that is to go to fill opacity and set it to 100%. That will show the background behind it, and you can pick whatever color you'd like. Here I picked a pale yellow. I also put line weight of 1, so that gives it that narrow border, that black line. And I also gave it a shadow length 5, so it pops it up. So that's one object that has a background and the text. If you wanted there to even be more space around that word and this border, you could go to the properties, to the layout, and there's a property margin all, and that will tell you how many pixels you would add around the words and the border. So there's a lot of flexibility there that you can do when you're creating those kind of labels. The other thing I want to point out before we get into the interactivity is, when you create a background, and especially if you're doing clicking and dragging, you can get frustrated by inadvertently moving your background. So one thing, if you're creating things that don't have interactivity, it's a good idea to go and lock them. And you lock an object by clicking on that little icon in the message center. So now this one's locked. It means that I cannot move its location. So if I drag, nothing happens. If I want to get that back again, you double click on the object, it brings it, you can unlock it, and then make whatever changes you want. Okay? So that's the way that works, as a nice, important way to help protect some of the placement issues that you might do. So we'll lock that. Okay, now, so to make the interactivity, first thing we want to place our objects where they need to be. So I'm going to move this and get it lined up as best I can. I could use opacity to really see through it to make sure it lined up well. And we want the label to show up about there on the steering wheel. Okay? Now the first thing we want to do is when I roll my mouse over this steering wheel, I want it to glow. When I move the cursor out, I want it to stop glowing. So that's a point and click sort of action. And so if you go into the point and click on our steering wheel, you'll see there's clicking, but there's also pointer over and pointer out. Pointer over triggers when the cursor moves over this object. Pointer out is when it is no longer overlapping. So what we want to do is make the steering wheel glow when the user pushes the cursor over it. So I'm going to create an interaction by going from that out. Now, if we look at our built-in ins, there's nothing here that says make it glow. So our default in properties are not going to help us. So we want to create our own custom action. So I go to properties, look at effects, and you'll see that here's a glow length property. And I want to change that. It's set at 0 right now. But by releasing there, that creates a new custom in. And it's saying, well, when the pointer goes over this, what length do you want to do? And we want it to have a nice, healthy glow. And I'm going to say 30. That's sort of the maximum glow length. So you can see that the wiring says once you move the cursor over this object, make its glow 30. I'm a big proponent of testing things out quick, so let's run this. And when I move my cursor over it, you see it glows. But now I need the other part, that when I move the cursor off, it stops glowing. Well, you ought to be able to think pretty quickly how that would happen. What we're going to do then is take the other one, pointer out. We're going to go to create another custom in, and this time we're going to reset the glow length to 0. So you can read these wires pretty easily. When pointer goes over, set the glow length to 30. Pointer goes out, set the glow length back to 0. Let's try it. Glow, not glow. So very straightforward there. Now, the last thing we want to do is then tie clicking on this steering wheel to showing the steering wheel text. So first off, we want to make sure that the steering wheel isn't being seen ahead of time. So under visibility, you want to make sure that this is hidden on run. I've already had that set, but you'll want to make sure that you set that to hide on run true, so that it's here so we can see it when we're designing our layout, but it will hide as soon as we run this. We want to show it when I click on the wheel. So I'm going to go back to my wheel, add one more out, and this time it's going to be click. And when we click, I want to show, so we're going to want to display, show that steering wheel text. So we'll run. The over and out works, and then when I click on it, boom, there's the steering wheel. Now when I move off, I also want to remove that steering wheel, so we need to have one more piece of logic here. So pointer out, in addition to setting the glow length to 0, that also needs to hide that text. Okay? So a number of wires here, but they're doing exactly what you would think. When I click, I show the steering wheel label. When I move the pointer over, I make the thing glow. When I move the pointer out, I make it stop glowing. I also remove the label. We'll try it one more time. Roll over, glow, out, click, move out, and they both erase. So, it's pretty straightforward, but it's just recognizing that you can have one trigger change things both on the object itself and on other objects, and it's a matter of sort of thinking out the sequence and creating the right interactions. Now, the other thing I want to point out is once you have this working, you can very, very easily recreate the rest of this. So I'm going to click the steering wheel and the text. I'm shift clicking. I'm going to hold the Alt key down, drag, and that's going to create a duplicate of those. Now all I need to do is, let's do the horn next. So I'm going to change the text here to horn. And I'm going to take my horn graphic and replace that steering wheel with that. I want to replace just that object. So now I've got the horn with its label. We'll call that the horn label. And all I need to do is come and position this horn at the right spot on the steering wheel. Move this label sort of so it's close to where you want to display it. And we're done. Notice that all the exact wiring remained between the objects I copied. So when I run this, I roll over the steering wheel, roll over the horn, click on the horn, I get that labeled. I click on the steering wheel, I get that labeled, and when I'm out. So all you need to do to replace all of these is just shift click on the pair of an object and its label, and then hold the Alt key down and drag that pair to create another one, and then change the label and replace the graphic, position them, and you're done. Okay. And now here's the solution to the second part of the challenge. In this one we had this scene where the eagle's sitting on a branch, and when you drag him he's going to fly, his arms will be outstretched, and when you let go he will descend and sit on the branch again. So we have three pieces. We've got the background, we've got a text object that gives instructions, and we've got our eagle. Now the background is never going to move, so we can lock that. Once you have the text created, we can lock that as well. Now all we have to do is worry about our eagle friend here. Now the first thing you want to do whenever you're dealing with movable objects is to make sure you go to the Actions tab and go to the movable property and say that's true. It gets confusing because Zebra lets you move objects as an author all the time. But if you don't mark it as movable, it's going to treat those as if you're repositioning objects rather than that you're actually moving them as a learner might when you're playing it. So that's one of the things that's easy to forget, and it can be confusing. So whenever you're doing with movable objects, make sure you remember to mark them as movable true. Okay, well now our simple activity is when the user drags this eagle, we want to change it to a different view of the eagle with outstretched wings. So that's going to be an out, and it'll be under drag and drop, and there we have drag start. And when we drag, we want to change the image, and so that's going to be a custom in. Go to appearance and pick fill graphic. Now when you get these, most of the options have several parameters. So fill graphic, while it showed up as one, I clicked the little white triangle to expand it, and you can see that we can fill in exactly which graphic we're replacing it, what key press might be equivalent to this action, and if there's going to be a delay. Well, we don't want a delay, we want it to change immediately, but we want to change that graphic. So I'm going to pick the image of the eagle in flight, drag it over here, hover over that field, and replace it. We're going to replace only that object. And so now we see that when we drag the eagle, he's going to change to that object. So again, let's try this. Start dragging, and there he's flying. Very good. So I want the reverse now to be when I stop dragging him, he's going to go back to being his normal self. So there's a dragging release. We'll do another fill graphic. And this time, I need to expand that, and we're going to, and actually it's set already with that same object, so I don't need to replace it. So what this is telling us is, and it's sort of hard to see because they're stretched, but when I drag start, I'm going to change it to the flying eagle. When I drag release, I'm going to change it back to the sitting eagle. Okay, cool. Now when we replace it, our last step is, I wanted him to descend, so even if you're, wherever you release him, he's going to go back to where he is. Well, the first step is I want to see, when I release, I want to go back to set the Y value to its original. So if we look at our properties under geometry, we can see location Y is telling me it's 435 right now when he's at the bottom. When I drag it up, it changes to a value, but when I release, I want to reset it to that. So I'm going to have another trigger, drag release, go to location Y, and it takes the current value, which is 435, which is the right value. But I want that to happen gradually. So under my location Y custom setter, there's a transition tween. We'll just use linear. There's various options of how you might make it work, but linear is sort of the best one. And I want that to take 3 seconds. So I'll put in the number 3, and so it's going to be a 3-second transition from wherever you drop it to where he's going to land. So we'll try that. There he's flying. I release. And then it takes him 3 seconds to go down to wherever in the Y direction. And the last thing then is, I don't want him, he has to have his wings out while he's descending. So I want this switch back to sitting to actually be delayed. And so I go to my fill graphic spot here and say, let's delay that switch of a graphic for 3 seconds. And so during that 3 seconds, the picture will descend, and then when it gets to the end, at that moment, he'll switch back to the sitting image. So one more try of running. Drag, he's flying. I let go. And I can keep doing that. And wherever I let him release, he descends in 3 seconds and then switches to a different view. So there you have it. It's a pretty straightforward wiring job on that one object. That's all that's happening, and we have drag start and drag release triggers, and we're switching the images and we're changing the location based on where you let the eagle go. So I hope that was interesting. I hope that revealed some new features, and that each week you're becoming more and more comfortable with the way that you can create interactivity in ZebraZapps.